After you've created your walkthrough and you've viewed it, you might find it necessary to modify it. Usually what happens is somewhere along the line the path wasn't drawn correctly for the cameras to flow on, which might give you the impression of going too fast or too slow as the walkthrough progresses. In this case, you might find it necessary to smooth out the walkthrough, and you can make changes to where it's either too fast or too slow. You can adjust the walkthrough by frames or by keyframes to give it a much smoother looking look. Currently, what we are on is walkthrough 1, which is by default the name of the walkthrough that's been created. Over here, we see the walkthrough at its beginning starting point. I want you to click on the crop frame and make sure that the controls show up. And when that happens, the ribbon above changes. Click Edit Walkthrough. When you click Edit Walkthrough, the walkthrough panel shows up and you have a recording type set of icons that appear. Two of them are grayed out because after you finish the walkthrough, you can't go back. It's only looking for you to go forward. So you have basically these three right here. You have frame and then keyframe. Take a look at options down here. You'll notice that there's a frame 1 of 300. That means that if you click next frame, you're going to be starting at frame number 2, and then you'll have basically 299 more to go. So it's much easier to work on next keyframe to modify than it is to work on next frames. So let's take a look at how to do that. Now, one of the things that you can do to edit a walkthrough, it's actually done two ways. You can do it basically the way you see it right here in this graphical representation, or you might want to look at your path again. Let's take a look at the path. I'm going to come up to Open Walkthrough and make sure that that's clicked and made sure that it's there. And then I want you to come over to the project browser, and I want you to go to Floor Plan 1 and pick it. When you pick it, what you should see is the path that has been developed and also the keyframes that are there. Make sure that Edit Walkthrough is clicked on, and you'll see that each keyframe then appears. Now, in this case, we're able to adjust by camera at each keyframe, and you'll notice here that we have a camera icon and a target. If I want to advance it, say to the next keyframe, I can come up to the panel and click, and it will then jump to that keyframe. At this point, I can take the target and I can actually move it around to adjust to see if that's a better view. The other thing I can do is I can also grab the camera itself and move it along the track. In this way, you're able to go ahead and adjust the graphic interface as far as how the cameras work in the walkthrough. Also, when you're doing the walkthrough, you can adjust the far clip plane. So if parts of the walkthrough don't show, you can advance the far clip plane in order to bring either more or less of the view into place. Sometimes when you're clicking in the view, you might get an alert box that asks you whether you want to get out of the walkthrough. It'll be up to you at that point to decide to ignore that warning or to cancel out and just continue on with what you're doing. Now, the other thing that happens is that you can upgrade the performance of the walkthrough by editing the frames. It's a little bit more complex. I want you to go to Properties, and when you click on Properties, go all the way down to the bottom to Other. And under Other, you will see Work Walkthrough Frames. Go ahead and click on 300, and you're going to get this dialog box that shows up. The Walkthrough Frames dialog box has a number of things going. First of all, note here that you have total number of frames. By default, that's how many frames a current walkthrough will go ahead and create. The other thing is that it's creating 15 frames per second. Now you can come in and change these. There's actually a couple different options that go on in here. This is option number 1, where you can take and maybe change the total frames. So if you wanted to speed up the walkthrough, you might reduce this from 300 to 250. If you want it to slow down, maybe you would increase this to 400. You can also do the same adjustment with frames. Typically, I would probably say leaving the frame per second at 15 is about right. Total frames might be something that you might want to look at. Now, let's take a look at some of these columns. The keyframe column here displays the total number of keyframes that are in this walkthrough. We've got 9 of them, and you'll see them right here. Additionally, you have a frame column. This displays the frame at which the keyframe begins. So right now, keyframe 1 starts at frame 1, and then you'll find that keyframe number 2 starts at 46.2, and so forth. There's also an accelerator column. This displays a numeric control for changing the speed of the walkthrough playback at this particular keyframe that comes through. There's also a speed column that's here. When you see the speed column, you can kind of open that up if you need to. And you'll see here that this displays the speed at which the camera travels along the frame. So in other words, it's going about 28 feet per second. There's also an elapsed time, which displays the amount of time that has elapsed since you did your first keyframe. So it just keeps on counting all the way through. So if we wanted to make a change, we could come up here to 300 and say that we're going to make it 400 and that our frames per second are going to run at, let's say, 20. Go ahead and hit apply and hit OK. And you can hit play and you'll see basically that it might be running a little bit differently. Now we can also look at how that operates in the other view, but right now we're looking at it from the path perspective. If you go to open the walkthrough and hit play, you'll see basically how quick it runs at these new speed settings that we have. And you see it's moving a little bit quicker through it than maybe the first walkthrough that we did. There we go. We're coming around the side of the building there. We're almost done. As we come through. And you'll see here that looks pretty smooth right now. And I think that looks pretty good. So we'll make sure that it stops. Now let's go back and make some other changes. Go back to the other in the properties and find the button here that now says 400 and click on it. Check off uniform speed. When you do that, it opens up the accelerator column here. So now we can take and either slow down or speed up the various keyframes that you see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one here and I'm just going to put in 0.5. And I'm going to come down here and do the same thing. Next one, we'll do the same thing. We'll hit 0.5 here. Same thing with this fella. And we'll take this last one here and do 0.5. And then on 6, 7, 8, and 9, we'll make them 2. So we'll just kind of double it right there. And we'll see what happens when we play it back. And we'll hit apply and OK. And we'll play it. And now we might see a little bit of a change to it. As we kind of go through, it's slowing up a little bit. And you'll see that it's moving along, maybe a little bit faster now. Sometimes you have to use much larger increments than that. Depending again on your path, you'll see that it's moving right along. Pretty good. There, it was very fast right there. You can see that those changes came into occurrence there. So, you can access any walkthrough you create by first locating it in the project browser in the walkthrough category. Selecting the crop view gives you access to modifying the cameras and editing the walkthrough. You can change into another view, normally a floor plan view, to check out the camera paths and to make adjustments there. To create a smoother walkthrough, access the walkthrough frames through the project browser. You can then change the number of frames for the walkthrough, the frame rate, and even the speeds for each keyframe.